Very special welcome to those who are guests with us this morning. We're glad to have you in this time of worship. It is a strange coincidence that this particular parable in the lectionary happens to fall on this particular anniversary. That the parable that you have heard this morning, Pat reading for us, would fall on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. It is a strange coincidence that somehow we are asked to deal with, as people of Judeo-Christian faith, our sense of forgiveness in a time when probably for most of us feelings are still very complex around those events that occurred that day. On the surface, we've handled those things with all kinds of platitudes. How many times have you heard people say, "Forgive and forget"? Is it that easy for you? Certainly is not for me. Or you've heard others say, "Forgive because it's the right thing to do." I guess cognitively I would agree with that, but it's not quite that easy, is it? To simply say, "Well, you're forgiven." And that's the end of it all. No, this is not an easy passage to consider, nor is it an easy day to come to. It is a challenge for people of faith to reflect again upon the pain, the horror, the sadness, and the loss that occurred on that day. Now, I honestly would like to change the end of the parable, okay? I'd like to just forget the end of the parable because, as you recall, at the end of this particular parable, as Jesus is teaching, he says, and you're going to get it. The Lord's going to dish it out in the end. Someone has got to pay when there is not forgiveness. And that's why I would much prefer to preach out of Luke than Matthew's gospel. Because Matthew has a way of saying that with routine. He talks about judgment in terms of the community of faith in which he is engaged. And I think it important for us today, when we think about this as a key to faithful living, forgiveness as a key to faithful living, that we remember that Matthew is talking about the community more so than he's speaking to individuals. Judgment plays an important role in this gospel. Judgment as a part of being a people of God in a particular place and a particular time. Now let's think about the story for just a few moments, because it's a fun story to kind of unpack, if you will. You've got this king, or this master, depending on how you translate it, who is, he's harsh. He's difficult. He can be tough. And the servant comes and is asked to repay a debt. Now, what's kind of unusual is the debt that the servant owes to the master is an immense amount of money, more than a servant would ever have. So Matthew sets this up in such a way that the servant owes this huge debt. He's got a yacht and 3 houses and owes it all to the master. The master said, "You can't pay it. It'll cost you." But then the servant gets down and pleads, gets on his knees, and he says, "Oh, goodness, mercy, have mercy. Have mercy on me." And the radical turn at this point is, what does the harsh master do? What does he do? "Oh, it's all right. It's okay. No problems. The debt is forgiven." And the servant now being liberated from this large debt that he owes his master, takes off. And the first thing he does is he runs into one of his fellow servants. And he says, "Repay me the debt you owe me." A small debt. Again, a strangeness about how the servant acts in this. Wouldn't one think that if you had been forgiven that kind of a debt, you might act a little differently toward others, especially if it was a candy bar that was owed you? And the other servant says, "Of course not. I can't repay you." Pleads with him. And the first servant throws him in jail until he can pay back the debt. So we have a switch of harshness on the part of both of these people, the master and the first servant. There is no pity for the second servant. And all the buddies of these two fellows who work with them, fellow servants, see this, or at least they hear about it. It gets out through the grapevine, kind of like churches. And they go to the master, and they say, "You can't believe what just happened, master." "Oh, I might." "Well, we just saw him go out and try to claim his debt, and our friend couldn't repay, and he threw him in jail." And so the master, obviously, is upset, and he says, "Bring him here. Bring him here." And he lays the picture out before him as though it was a mirror. He says, "I've forgiven you this debt. Why is it you cannot forgive the debt of others?" And then tells him about the judgment that will come for those who do not forgive. Strange, strange parable. Strange parable on a day when we probably continue to have very mixed emotions towards people that we see perhaps as unlike ourselves. Makes me wonder what motivates us to have pity, to have pity and compassion on others, to take pity on those that are around us as a church. How does that work? Makes me wonder about what motivates a person to show mercy day in and day out in their faith life. Do you see yourselves in this story anywhere? It's important to remember that this is not an allegory, a simple allegory. For if it was, certainly the master would be a very harsh Lord on us. But it is an important story in the sense that these questions are what shape our lives into the future as a community. Do we need in our lives, in our relationships, a reminder that Matthew gives to this church? A reminder that in the light of a coming reckoning that we are asked to be faithful in the way that we forgive others. Is it important in terms of how we express that with intentionality? Now, I would say for certain that many of us find that forgiveness is not something that happens overnight, is it? It is something that is a part of the journey, and each day as you drop your feet out of bed and as you think about what it is life is about and what bothers you and what brings joy into your life, I continue to press into those areas of life that have harmed me, been painful, where I have hurt others and they have hurt me. It's important to remember that those are scars, and that we are encumbered with other losses along the way that help to pull up the pain of a 9/11, even when we have lost a loved one, even when A relationship has died because that too is another grief. And so we don't forget. It's important not to forget. But it's also important to remember, and I think Matthew knew a human sense, or had a human sense about community that was far beyond his years. That when we do not have mercy, when we do not relate to others around us the way God has related to us, that we pay a price. That we pay a price, that healing cannot happen, that communities cannot be whole, that the hope of wholeness is simply not there when communities do not forgive and receive forgiveness. I want to share with you a couple of illustrations that you may have heard of, two stories that are important to us as we consider how it is we forgive. The first may be almost as notable as 9/11, and that is a piece that was done by NPR's Joseph Shapiro, All Things Considered. He did an interview about the loss of 5 Amish children in a school building in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania. I want to read for you a portion of this interview. Shapiro speaks first. The killer, Charles Roberts, wasn't Amish, but Amish families knew him as the milk truck driver who made deliveries. Last month, it announced that the Amish community had donated money to the killer's widow and 3 young children. It was one more gesture of forgiveness, gestures that began soon after the shooting. A sociologist, Mr. Donald Craybill, speaks. I think the most powerful demonstration of the depth of Amish forgiveness was when members of the Amish community went to the killer's burial service at the cemetery. Shapiro. Donald Crabill's a sociologist with Elizabethtown College, the co-author of Amish Grace, where he talks about Amish forgiveness as a community-wide response. Mr. Crable. Several families, Amish families, who had buried their daughters just the day before were in attendance at that service. And they hugged the widow, and they hugged the other members of the killer's family. Shapiro. Those acts of forgiveness inspired people around the world, but they also caused a misperception that the Amish have gotten over things quickly as a community. Then the interview goes on to talk about how that misperception plays itself out and how counselors were sent in to work with the Amish. The last 2 paragraphs. Tragedy changes you. You can't stay the same. Where that lands, you don't always know, but what I found out in my own experience is that you know if you bring a lot, little pieces you have left to God, God somehow will help you. God will make it good. And I see that happening in the school shooting as well. One just simple thing that the world got to see is this simple message of forgiveness. Shapiro closes the interview. And because the Amish can express that forgiveness because they hold no grudges, Baylor says they're better able to concentrate on the work of their own healing. And finally, a brief story about a woman and her husband and their daughter, 7-year-old daughter, who went camping in Montana. This happened in 2007. This young family took off from Montana to enjoy their greatest and best vacation. And they were tenting, and the first night that they were out in Montana, their daughter was kidnapped from the tent. A slit was cut in the end of the tent. The daughter was dragged out and taken away. The woman says, "That was the day that I got in touch with my rage. That night, getting ready for bed, I said to my husband, even if the kidnapper were to bring Susie back alive and well, I could kill him with my bare hands and smile on my face. I knew the kidnapper could be liable for the death penalty, and I wanted him to hang for it. However, I had always tried to live my faith with integrity, and my conscience was calling me to forgive my enemy. I realized as I gave myself to that desire for revenge, it would obsess and consume me, so I promised to cooperate with whatever way that I could to remove the fury from my life and receive and give forgiveness." She goes on further to talk about how it is 1 year after the incident, they discovered, or she had a phone call in the middle of the night, and it was the person who had kidnapped and murdered their daughter. And this person was wanting to taunt her, but rather than reacting to his language and his presentation, she simply listened to him. And she said at that point, he continued to talk, and he talked 80 minutes on the phone, which, first of all, his conscience was bothering him, and he could not hold it in any longer. And further than that, the police at that point in time were able to trace the call and find the killer, and ultimately find the body of their daughter. This woman now travels throughout the world advocating for an end to the death penalty. She cannot live without forgiveness in her life. Why would we as a people of faith care? Why would we care? Well, because it's the right thing to do, certainly. Will we forget? No, we will not. But it's important, I think, that we remember that until we make intentional choices around how it is we use tools like forgiveness, our lives and our relationships maintain a brokenness that cannot be removed. We can never be the whole people God would have us to be. May God continue to bless us as we walk the journey. And may God help us each and every day to remember where we have harmed and whom we have harmed, who we have harmed. To beg forgiveness when necessary, to receive forgiveness when necessary, so that we can be whole and light can be shared with the world. Amen. This morning in our time, I want to